Hello and welcome to another video in my 101 series for VisualNeo for Windows. Today we're going to be building an application, a very simple application, but the main purpose of it is to touch on subroutines, functions, and add-ons. This is going to take a little bit, so let's just go ahead and get started. I have another application started here. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to start with the text object that we're going to be manipulating. We'll just put it right in here. We'll put in hello world. So what we're going to be doing is programmatically changing the properties of this text object. So that's good. That can stay there. What we're going to do is manipulate the properties of this text control or text object, and we're going to put that line of code into a subroutine. So we'll go to subroutine, and I'll make a new subroutine, and we'll call it change font. You can't use, oops, I'm sorry, font. You can't use spaces in the names. It's important to remember. So when I call on this subroutine, everything between the title and the return is going to execute. So let's put in here, we want to affect the text object. So what we'll do is we'll go to objects, and down here a little ways we have, there it is, set object font. And if we put that in there, what we want to affect is the text 3 that I put in there. You can see that's the only object in there. I'm going to leave all this just default where it is, because what we're going to be doing is we're going to be, you can see here is black is the color, Arial is the font, 9 is the size, normal is the style. And those are what we're going to be affecting. So I'm going to put this in here just for reference, and I'm going to cancel it out by putting a period in front of it. And under black, instead of black, I'm going to put F color. And then under font, the actual font, I'm just going to put font name. And under this is the size, and we're going to replace that with a variable called F size. And then on the style, of course, we'll change this to F style. And, we'll just keep, for consistency's sake, we'll do F name, F color. It's a good idea to make sure your variables are making sense to you as you go. So instead of putting in actual data, statically, we're going to put in variables that we can change. So let's start with the actual font itself. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to call on a function. So if I double click my page and I go to when it loads during page enter, we are going to actually call under control. There's your function library. You can call on a function. The function I'm going to call on is get fonts. Now, this function doesn't come with VisualNeo. You have to go to the website and download it. It's free, and they actually have a ton of add-ons and functions available for download for free. I think it's like 2 guys that just put out a whole bunch of really awesome add-ons, and they're for free. So you can just go download them. It's wonderful. We're going to be using this one, and I have to change a couple of properties here. I'm just going to use all. And I got to save all. What this is going to do is it's going to go into the computer that's running the application and get a list of all the installed fonts. And it's going to return that list in a variable. And I'm going to put in here font list as my variable to put all that information into. And the important thing to remember here is that after every font, it's going to put a carriage return or an enter into it. So that's what separates each font that it gets from the list. So that's good. That's going to happen when I run it. Now, what are we going to do with that? So I'm going to put a list box right here. And the the list box variable. So every time I make a selection on the list box, whatever I selected is going to go into this variable. And I'm going to, this is going to be the font name. So I'm going to do f name because that's the variable we defined. We can actually take a look at it right here. There's our f name, font name. We'll insert that. Now, to get the list to populate in the list box, if you remember, I mentioned that each font is separated by an enter. So if I wanted to put this list items in myself, I would say item 1, and I would hit enter and put item 2, enter, and so on. And since that I know that that list that it returned has an enter after every font, all I have to put in here is the variable font list, and it will populate that into there all automatically. Let's give this a run, see if it works. It should work. Let's see what happens. There we go. So there's a list of all my installed fonts. There's a ton of them. Okay, good. So now we can select a font from my computer or the computer that it's running on. It'll be, you know, whatever the user has installed. So we have to do something when we click make a selection. We need to the variable is going to go into fname. However, if you look, I'm going to change this now, and I'm going to put in here fname variable, and also just to display what I'm talking about here, I'm going to make a text entry object, and here I'm going to make this as well fname, just so I can show you something, what's going to happen. And this is where it's going to get a little bit tricky. So if I make a selection from the font list, you can see that it goes in there. What we need is this, just the name. We don't need this true type. So we have to separate this string. We have to cut this out. And okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to do that whenever we make a selection. So I'm going to double click on my list box and go into actions. Every time a selection is changed, we're going to need to manipulate that string. We need to remove what was in there. So under insert action, you can go to strings. And in here, what I want to do first is I want to parse it. And what that basically means is it's going to cut it into pieces. Okay, so we'll parse it. And the source string is fname. And the delimiter, okay, so it's going to find a character and it's going to decide that's where I cut it. And we know that the true type font was always in brackets. So I'm going to choose the beginning bracket as the place where this string is going to get cut. And then we'll store the parsed elements in so it's going to go in an array based on a variable. I'm just going to use X for now. And the number of elements, which we're not going to be using here, but can be useful, I'm going to put in Y. So this line of code, of course, is going to cut it into two pieces, and it's going to cut it right where it finds that first bracket. So we know we have two pieces, x1 and x2, because this is going to be an array when it's done. So let's take a look with that as it is. Let's take a look at x1. Instead of fname as the variable to display here, let's choose, let me refresh, X, and I know it's an array and I want the first piece, X1. So if we run it and I make a selection, there it is. Okay, that's what it was, but it got rid of this true type piece. However, we still have a problem. You can see here there's a space at the end. That space is going to mess it up. So now we have to trim that space off. Okay, so we go in here. We know that we have x1 is the one we want to use. In strings, we want to delete. But using delete, we need to know the position of the character we want to delete. So we know it's the last character, right? So we're going to get the length of the string. We're going to get the length of x1, and we'll put that in Y. Okay, so it's going to find the length of that and put it in Y. Now we have the length. So if we go to string delete, the source string is x1, and the position of the first character to delete, well, we know it's the last one. So if it's 13 characters long, including the space, y will equal 13. So the position of the character to delete is indeed y. And the number of characters to delete, we just want 1. And we'll store that right back into fname. So with this little block of code, we took fname and we cut it up into pieces. We found out the length of the first piece, and then we deleted the very last character of x1 and stored the results back into fname. So if we go back here and we use the variable fname, let's run it and take a peek. There it is, and no space at the end. Okay, so we've managed to do that. Now, if you remember, we made a subroutine called change font that's actually going to do the changing. It's actually going to manipulate the properties of this text object, and fname is right here. And what in what we just did, we got the font name, we trimmed it, and we put it back into fname. So we're going to call on this every time we make a change. So let's go here, and if you go back to control, down here you have subroutine access. We're going to go to the subroutine we created, change font, and run it. Now, what should happen is the font will change, and you can see that's exactly what's happening here. Let's find something. There we go. Nice big long one. See, okay, so we've got that happening. That's great. We're manipulating that property perfectly. Now, what else we need to do is the style. Let's work on the style. For that, we're going to use radio button group, and we'll just touch on that real quick. I'm just going to use 3 for speed's sake. The first one we're going to do is bold, and in the variable to store the results in, we're going to want to put in font style. F style. There it is. Okay, bold, and then when we click it, we're also again going to want to go to that subroutine and run it, and it'll apply that new variable. So we'll do another one. We'll call this one italic, and we'll also put that into F style. And when it's clicked, we'll run that subroutine. And I guess normal, and we'll put normal. We want to be able to change it back to normal. So we'll put that normal in here. And again, change this to the F style variable. And when it's clicked, we want to call on that subroutine. Okay, so let's take a look if that works. Let's put a font in there. Let's go bold. Yep, italic, normal, perfect. That's good enough for now. So we've got 2 properties left to manipulate. Let's go to size next. To do that, I'm going to use a combo box. I'm going to put it right here. And I'm not going to put any list items in it just yet, but the variable I do want to store in F size. So we'll choose that. Oh, did I misspell it? I misspelled it. I'm sorry, guys. That's supposed to be F size. And then on action, we again will call that subroutine. Now you can see the use of a subroutine if you have, we only have 1 line of code, but if you have 20 or 30 lines of code, you don't want to have to type that into the action of each one of these items. You can just put it as a subroutine and call it when you need it, which is fantastic. So this isn't going to have any numbers in it as is. What I'll do is instead of entering them in manually, on the page enter action, when the page loads, I'm just going to put a little note in here, populate font size. That's good. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to do a loop. So I'll go back to control and put a loop in. Obviously I don't want to set that small. The smallest I want the font to be is, let's say, 8. And the largest I want it to be is, let's say, 40. And the variable to put the position as it runs through the loop, I'm going to put it in a variable called position. Okay, so this is going to run a loop from 8 to 40. And every time it goes through the loop, I'm going to go to objects. And a little bit further down, you'll see here, list box and combo box. I'm going to add an item. The object I'm going to be using is the combo box 1. That's this one right here. And the line number, I want it to just add to the end each time. And the text I want it to add is the position, because during the loop, the first time through, the position variable is going to equal 8, then 9, then 10, all the way to 40. And so I want to put the position variable in there. So when I run this, you can see in the actions, it's gone through and populated this list for me. Okay, so that's a nice, easy way to do it. Rather, if you have long lists and you know, and it's sequential, you can use that way. So when we make a selection, it's going to change the F size. Sorry, that's a terrible mistake. Variable. Let's make sure I didn't really screw that up. Let me go to change font here, and I did. It's a C. Okay. Well, we'll just leave it at that rather than change it everywhere. And let's see if that works. So we'll choose one of those. We'll go bold. Now let's go italic. Let's change it to like 30. There we go. Now we've changed the font itself, the style, and the size. Now let's do the color. This is where we're going to get into an add-on. So all add-ons, well, I shouldn't say all, but everyone I've used uses or utilizes the rectangle object. So we're going to put a rectangle in here because I know that's what it's going to use. And I want this to take place. I want the add-on to use this when the page loads. So I'm going to go back into my page enter. And here I'm going to do populate color selector. And that's what we're going to do in this line of code. And that's pretty easy. When you add add-ons, they always go to the bottom of the list. I have quite a few here. And we're going to do as Neo combo. And we're going to create one on that rectangle object. So we'll choose the rectangle. And we're going to create. And the type we're going to do is a color selector. Okay. Now, as it is, that's not applying anything to a variable. So we have to assign a variable to that rectangle object because that rectangle object is what this add-on is using. So the next thing we want to do, this is it. Okay, so you can, let's do this. The rectangle object we're using is rectangle1. Now this is fantastic because we can call on the subroutine right here. We don't have to add an extra line of code for that. So here's a list of subroutines. We only have change font. So we'll put change font as the subroutine we want to run every time a selection is made. And the variable we know is fcolor. So let's grab fcolor. Now that should do it. Let's run this program and see if it works. Okay, so we'll choose some fonts here. Well, let's make it, oh Lord, not Comic Sans. How about this? Consoles. Let's do something bold. Okay, and the size and the color we can change. There we go. So that's it. I went over a lot pretty fast. You can always watch the video again or go to a spot that you missed. But we did touch on functions, which is great. We touched on subroutines and add-ons a little bit on this one. So I'm not gonna. I might get in more in depth on specific add-ons in another series. But for this one, I feel like we touched on a lot that's going to be very useful. And as always, have fun programming.